Welcome to Catholic Feedback. I'm your host, Keith Nestor. On this podcast, we connect the eternal truths of the Catholic faith with everyday life. Send in your questions and comments to feedback@catholicfeedback.com. This podcast is brought to you by Down to Earth Ministry, a ministry of stewardship, a mission of faith, and by the generous support of our patrons. For more information, please visit downtoearthministry.org. That's down, the number 2, earthministry.org. Let's get to it. Welcome to Catholic Feedback with Keith Nestor. I'm your host. This is an incredibly amazing day for me. This is like one of those days that, sometimes you think things in your life and your faith come full circle. Well, this is like full circle and then another half a lap around. Because today on our podcast, I have a special guest, a man who, he's no stranger to Catholic podcasts and different things. I'm sure you're all going to know who he is. But for me, he's a special person in my life. Even though we've never really sat down and had a conversation, this will be our first really extended conversation. But this is a man that God has used to work mightily in my life. And I consider him one of the key players in why I became Catholic. And I've even written about this in my book, and I've talked about it a lot in my testimonies. But today on the podcast, we have none other than Catholic apologist Steve Ray with us. So welcome, Steve, to the podcast. I'm so happy that you're here.
Thank you, Keith. Thank you very much, Keith. Good to be here, and I love seeing enthusiastic, manly, young guys like you grabbing a hold of the faith and running with it. It does my heart good.
Well, I'm excited that you said young because my kids remind me every day that I'm getting old. But, I'm fired up for the faith. And I think that's one of the things that attracted me to you, because when I would watch your talks about the Eucharist and about the papacy, I always sensed in you, like, you have this fire and this passion in the way that you live your faith and the way that you talk about your faith. I remember just being instantly drawn into that. And it's super awesome.
Well, I've always, ever since I was 17, I was raised in a Baptist family, and I always appreciated my Baptist tradition and the Bible. But it was in 17 years old, back in the hippie days. This was back in the late 60s, early 70s, so you'll see how old I am. And you mentioned your kids telling you you're old. Wait until your grandkids tell you you're old.
Oh, my goodness.
I have 18 of them now, 18 grandkids. 2 of them are going to be 18 in 2 weeks, so that makes me feel old. But anyway, when I was 17 years old, I was a long-haired hippie kid, bell-bottom blue jeans, and I remember hearing Billy Graham on the radio, and I snuck out the back door of the house, and I walked down the old country road that I lived on then, and I said, Jesus, I'm only 17 years old, and I'm a rebellious hippie, but tonight I'm going to give my whole life to you. Wow. And that was the most important day of my life. And it set the trajectory like a rocket ship taking off. And that set the trajectory for my life. And I've never left that. But, and over time, became an evangelist and a Bible teacher and everything else. Now, when I was 39, I like to say that when I was 17, Jesus introduced himself to me personally. And when I was 39, he said, okay, now it's time for you to meet the family.
I love that.
And it brought me into the Catholic Church.
I love that. That is so awesome. And one of the things that I think converts a lot of times, there's so many things that we don't know we're going to love about being Catholic. And to me, we get into the church, we know we're going to love the Eucharist, we know we're going to love, maybe even the liturgy or whatever. But I find that there's so many things that are unexpected that we go, wow, I didn't know. How did I ever live without this? And the whole idea of the saints and the intercession of the saints and that family aspect, isn't it incredible?
Confession is one of those things too. Confession. Yeah. Who's going to think that you would enjoy going? In fact, I've always hated confession, and I hate it more now than I did before. But who wants to go in and sit down in front of a man, look him right in the eye, and tell him all the stupid things you thought and your sinful things you've done? I have some pride. I don't like doing that. But then again, there's nothing I love better. I love going to. And who would have ever dreamed that I would say that I love confession? But coming into the Catholic Church and going in there, it's kind of like being very cathartic. It just cleans you right out and come out of there. I feel like I'm floating on air every time I come out of confession. So all these things about the church that you fall in love with that you may not even know you're going to fall in love with until you actually get there.
I love that. Isn't that amazing? I mean, when you think about it, like the church, I like to look at it like it's a treasure chest. And of course, I always think back to that example in Matthew where Jesus talks about the man who had the treasure in the field, and he buys everything, or he sells everything that he owns to buy the field. And then it says that in his joy, he digs that treasure. And I think two things. I think number one, he's got to work for it, because the treasure wasn't just sitting there. He had to dig for it. And there's that element of the effort that we put into our faith. I know we get accused a lot of, you Catholics have to earn your salvation, or you work for your salvation, which we could talk about that. But the idea that it's true that we have to invest ourselves in the exploration of our faith. But when we do, it says that he had joy. And he wasn't this miserable guy. He had joy in what he was doing. And I think that's something that I think converts can really relate to if they've done that. They're like, wow, I didn't know it was going to be this good.
Imagine finding a treasure chest full of gold coins in your backyard. If you're not excited about that, you're dead. And
Amen.
The Catholic Church, I think, is the church is the best kept secret in the world. And to discover it, you get a whole lot better than gold. You get eternal life.
Amen. Well, the idea for what I want to talk to you about, sort of the framework of this, is how to keep your cool when people attack your Catholic faith. And the reason why I wanted to ask you specifically about this, and I want our listeners to hear a little bit more about how you came to be a Catholic when you said the Lord at 39 introduced you to the family. And I can imagine, and I've heard some of your talks about this, but you were a pretty passionate anti-Catholic guy for a while. I remember hearing stories about you with like a Luther t-shirt and leading tours around Germany. I can't even imagine what it was like for you to make that shift. But let's just tell everybody briefly, like, how did that happen? Like, what made you become Catholic?
Well, my wife started it actually because we went to a Baptist church one Sunday morning like we always did, and she got in the car and said on the way home, I can't listen to that man preach anymore and call it worship. Wow. She said, it's not the kind of worship God wants. I have all of the sermons of the great Baptist preacher, I'll think of his name. Oh, come on, I think of his name. But anyway, he's one of the greatest Baptist preachers ever. That'll come to me. I'm getting old, like I said. And he said in one of his sermons that there is no form of worship that is higher than a good sermon. That's the highest form of worship, is to listen to a good sermon. So my wife intuitively knew that was wrong, said something's not right. Well, that started the whole thing. We began to see the problems with Protestantism. What is the source of authority? We said Bible alone, and yet all of my friends, we couldn't agree on what the Bible said and how to interpret it. We'd get together and we'd argue the whole time about verses in the Bible. What about morality or contraception, masturbation, abortion, all of these things? Who says that they're wrong? Doesn't say that in the Bible, and if it doesn't say it in the Bible, then it's not wrong. So with the Bible alone, you can do pretty much anything you want. And we started to realize there was a lot of problems within Protestantism and disunity and fragmentation. And we came to a point in 1993 where we almost became agnostic.
Wow.
I do a whole hour conversion story where I explain these problems and how we began to experience them. And so after a period of time, a good friend of ours named Al Cresta, we were best friends for 12 years, he drops this bomb on us one Sunday afternoon. Steve, Sally and I are going to return to the Catholic Church of my youth. Oh, he was a Protestant pastor. He was an evangelical radio talk show host. We studied the Bible together. We homeschooled our kids together. This was like the most stupid thing I've ever heard in my life. And I remember saying, Al, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life. You're way too smart to be a Catholic. What are you thinking? Well, my wife and I then started to really look into it more from the standpoint of trying to prove to him he's wrong than to discover anything on our own. And for us, I was so staunchly evangelical. All of our friends were evangelical Protestants that if you'd ever said you're going to become a Catholic, I would have told you you're going to the nut house and you're insane. And I could have never dreamed myself doing that. But as this started to happen, I remember being terrified by it because it was making sense. As we started to read the fathers of the church, these are the guys that twisted my arm behind my back. And I write about him in my book, Crossing the Tiber. I tell the story of how the fathers of the church, because they didn't have a New Testament yet, they still had the words of the apostles ringing in their ears. That's what they knew. And they believed in the things the Catholic Church believed in, the real presence of Christ and confession of sins and all the things that we practice as Catholics, the early church did. Even though it may have been in a seed form, it was there. But at the same time, Keith, I've always been a rebel. I've always been countercultural. I never have followed the crowd. And if I see the crowd going somewhere, I'll go the other way. And I thought, you know what? There's no way to be more rebellious and more countercultural than to be a Catholic. In today's age, if you want to really, when my son came to me when he was 16, he's almost 40 now, he's got 8 kids, but when he was 16, he says, Dad, I'm thinking of getting some body piercing here in the nose and, earrings, and I get some tattoos and stuff. And I said, why? He said, to be like everybody else. Now, I'm not commenting on tattoos because I like yours. But I said, why are you going to do that? And he said, because, Dad, I want to be different. And I said, Jess, everybody's getting tattoos. You're not going to be different by getting that. If you want to be different, son, be an authentic Catholic, and everybody's going to notice you. And he took me up on it. That kid took me up on it. You won't find a more Catholic guy now. So even though we were at a stage where my wife and I, at the end of 1993, seems like a long time ago now, but it still seems like yesterday, I was scared about this whole Catholic thing because we did not want to be Catholic, and we knew it would change our life and we'd lose all our friends and it would change our world. But at the same time, I couldn't think of anything more countercultural and radical than to do to become a Catholic. So eventually the radical side won.
Wow. So when we're talking about what it's like when people attack your faith, which I'm sure you went through that. Obviously, you can't have not with your background. And I know a lot of our listeners go through that because I get emails and messages from people all the time that are saying to me, how do I deal with this? Like, I'm being attacked. And I remember for me, it still happens, but what was it like for you to go from being like hostile towards Catholicism to now you're on the other side? You're receiving those questions and those points of fact or whatever that people were that you were putting towards other people. Now you're the one getting them. What was that like for you?
For me, it was exhilarating. I've always been a combatant. I've never been one that just wilts like a flower. I was exhilarated by it. My wife, not so much. She's a gentle soul. But I was exhilarated by it because I used to be on the other side and I knew their arguments better than they did. So for them to come and challenge me, the worst thing that can happen to an evangelical who attacks a Catholic is to find out the Catholic used to be an evangelical and knows the Bible better than they do.
Amen. Amen.
So when someone comes to me and says, hey, Steve, are you born again? My first reaction is, yes, I love it. They asked me the question. Because I used to ask people that question. Are you born again? Do you know you're going to heaven? If you died today and God said, why should I let you into my heaven? What would you say? And the Catholic would always go, I haven't killed anybody. But for me now, on the other side, I knew the arguments. I used to teach classes on how to convert Catholics. So now to be a Catholic, I understood their arguments. I understood the Bible. I knew how they think. So for me, it was very exhilarating. And at the same time, and I know when you're young and when you've discovered something, I also was very passionate, like you said earlier, and I wasn't quiet about things. So I did make waves, and I regretted some of them with my family, especially my older brother. I did it when I first became a Christian at 17. I went right to my brother and told him he's going to hell and he needs to get saved. You know the drill.
Yeah.
You got to tell everybody. Now, when I become Catholic, I was a little older, but I was still now just as excited. And I went and told everybody they had to leave the evangelical church and become Catholics because that's the fullness of the faith. So I burned some bridges back then. So what we're talking about today, I've learned the hard way.
Yeah, I think, I talk about this a little bit too sometimes that, and I heard this originally, this term from Calvinists. They talk about the cage phase, when a person becomes a brand new Calvinist, you got to lock them in a cage for a year before you let them talk to anybody because, I had buddies of mine when we were younger that discovered Calvinism and now it was like all they wanted to talk about were these doctrines of Calvinism, whatever. And I remember feeling like,
Right.
dude, whatever, I don't care about that. But it was, everything was boom, boom, boom. And I think sometimes for Catholic converts, for new people, we can wind up in that place too. And I think it's important to walk that line of being able to engage people and defend your faith, but at the same time, not winding up in situations where you're going to regret later. So, like, how do you know when someone is just too hostile to engage with them? I mean, is there ever a point? Because I know you can go toe to toe with anybody, and you probably wouldn't back down. But do you ever find yourself like in front of somebody, or somebody's just interacting with you? Maybe it's online or through an email or whatever, where you're just like, okay, this is just too much. Because let's face it, a lot of the people listening to this aren't going to be, I know I'm not, that we're not going to be nearly the level of apologist that you are and be able to just grab church father quotes and scriptures off the top of our head. So is there ever a point when you just look at someone who's trying to engage you with hostility and say, yeah, we're not doing that?
When I was younger as a Catholic, I usually didn't back off. And I have to say that's where it's like lifting weights. If you're a wimp and you want to not be a wimp anymore, you go to a gym and you start exercising. The more you lift the weights, the stronger you get. There was probably a period of 10 years that I'd take on any comers. Even if I thought I might lose, I'd learn. I'd get stronger from it. And I really have to say that's how I learned apologetics. I have a lot more to learn, and I've forgotten a lot that I have learned. My head's not in the clouds. I'm very realistic about what I don't know still and what I have forgotten even. But I do have to say that over time, that's how I learned. And one of the things that Catholics hesitate to talk to people is they're afraid they're going to get asked a question they don't know how to answer. I think that's the number one fear that keeps us from sharing our faith and the church with people. What if they ask me this? I don't know those Bible verses. I don't know that quote from the Father, so I'm just going to shut up. Well, first of all, we can learn those things, and that's what we should be doing. We should be learning those things, like lifting weights, like getting into a gym and working on it. Because it may be your grandkids or your kids that ask you the question. You darn well better have the answers because, well, Dad doesn't even know, so I'm going to leave. It's incumbent on us to know. We are required to know, even if love of our own family. But in those years, even if I didn't know the answer, we Catholics have to realize that there's no shame in saying, that's a really good question. I don't have the answer for that right now. But I know there are answers, so let's have a cup of coffee or a beer next week, and I'll tell you the answer. Now, first of all, you are not on the spot to give an answer right now. Your interlocutor, I didn't say it right, but your questioner, your opponent there, will respect you for having the honesty to say you don't know, and they'll be anxious to hear what you have to say. So then you go home, and you've got a week. Study, do your homework on that topic, get ready, come back, and then he may knock you over again. Good, I'll come back in another week. This is how we learn. So is there times where I've walked away or did it? I remember a lot of times that I would, if it was a personal thing, I realized I used to write letters. If people go on my website, CatholicConvert.com, I've got letters on there that are, some of them 200 pages, where I had more time back in those days than I do now. And if someone would write me an email, I would write them back an answer. And sometimes it was a long answer. And usually I never heard back from them. But I learned that way. And I made material that other people can use now. I've got hundreds of documents on my website under CatholicConvert.com resources that people can print out and read and use. They're free. But there were times where then I realized I'm wasting my time with this person. This person is not listening. This person is talking to me, but he's not hearing a thing I have to say. And the whole time I'm talking, he's going, waiting for his response. Now, I've learned over time not to waste time with people like that. I will say to them, email or something, I love you, brother, and I'm glad you care for my soul enough to want to convince me the other way. But I'm really not interested in arguing with you right now. But if you ever get to a point where you want to have an honest discussion, let me know.
That's a good point. because you can't really have. It's sort of like watching a political debate sometimes, where you recognize that the candidates aren't really engaging with one another. They just have this list of things that they feel like they have to say, and no matter what the question said to them is, or no matter what the other person says, that doesn't make a difference. They're just going to go with my next point is. So someone could say, you know, when it comes to our conversations about our faith, if someone says to you, and you're a Catholic, and they say, well, are you born again? And then you go into this explanation of the truth of, yeah, of course we're born again. We invented that, you know, and we talk through. Then instead of engaging that, they're just going to say, well, you know, the Bible says, call no man father.
Right.
And
They jump. That's another point. You got to keep them on one topic. Say, no. We were talking about being born again. Let's go. Now, there are times, though, Keith, where when I was at a conference, I just traveled to the Philippines 6 times doing big conferences, 6 different times for some 3 weeks at a time, my wife and I. And we would have big auditoriums, sometimes of 5,000 people. And many of those Catholics in the Philippines have been converted out of the Catholic Church. And they are very rabid. They are very angry, and they want to go right back after the Catholics. And the poor Catholics in the Philippines, they're naive in a good sense. They love the Lord, and they've never been attacked before. And so they come to the conference, and they want to hear me, and they want to be reaffirmed in their belief, and they know is true. So I'll give you one example. When I didn't back down, and normally I would not have even talked to this young man, but I did it for the sake of the other 5,000 people. Sometimes you will do a conversation or a debate because other people are listening, and you're doing it for them, even though you know your debater isn't listening to you, but you're doing it for others. So this young man stood up and yelled out in the middle of my talk, "You call the Pope Holy Father, and you're wrong, because the Pope is a sinner like everybody else. And you're not supposed to call anyone father, and he's a sinner, so nobody should call him Holy Father." And I said, "Young man, before you stand up and make a fool out of yourself in front of 5,000 people, you really ought to get to know your Bible a little better." Because that's what he's trying to say is, I'm Catholic and don't know my Bible, and now he does. And I said, when you get to know your Bible better, you'll know that the word holy has 2 meanings, not one. One meaning is sinless, and the Pope is not. The second meaning is to be consecrated or set apart for something. It means that you're called and set apart for a purpose. So the Holy Father is not holy in the sense of being sinless, but he is holy in the sense of being called out and set apart for a special task. And I said, and you, young man, should also become holy and realize you've been called by God. And you should really study your Bible more before you stand up in front of all these people and make a fool of yourself. Well, everybody in that auditorium got to their feet and applauded, because they've never been defended like that. They're attacked all the time. Yeah. Nobody's ever defended them in public. And they love saying, hey, Catholics can do it. He did it. I may not be able to do it, but I know I'm in the right place being a Catholic. Now, I didn't do it for that young man because he wasn't going to listen to me, but I did that for the other people who were in the audience.
That's a great point that I don't think I've ever really thought about before, is that sometimes the way we respond to people who attack us, who are hostile towards our faith, isn't about that person. It's about who else is a part of that, right, ecosphere of conversation or whatever.
Which is also why you have to keep your cool and not lose your temper. You have to be the one who's Christ-like. Yeah. You can be strong. Jesus was strong. If you ask, was Jesus nice? No, he was not nice. He went into the temple with a whip, and he told the Pharisees, you snakes and vipers. So Jesus wasn't nice, but he was honest. And so, but I have to be, when I am talking to somebody, I have to keep myself within certain parameters, my own conduct.
Yeah, that kind of goes to my next question, which is, what are some things Catholics should avoid saying when they're challenged? Do you have any insight on that, as far as like?
Well, you shouldn't call the other person stupid. You shouldn't say, you know what, you're an ignorant buffoon. So you don't want to insult people. I know that you're probably going to ask me this later too. What can we expect when people argue with us? But you don't want to use ad hominem arguments.
Right.
And what that means for people, it's a fancy Latin word that means an argument against the man. Like, say you and I are debating something, and you're getting the best of me. So I say, you know what, Keith, you're ugly and you're stupid. Now that's an argument against the person, and I'm not doing very good at making my point with you. So my weakness shows when I start attacking you as a person and not the ideas that you're espousing. And I think that's one of the things that we need to avoid doing is making it personal. We should,
Yeah.
at any cost, avoid making it personal and making it impersonal, keeping it third person, keeping the ideas, but not attacking that person.
I think in my own experience, that's something that when I've been attacked for my faith, like I get attacked personally all the time. Like people, and the way it might sound like, and for the listeners out there, this could happen to you. Someone's going to say, you're a liar, you're a deceiver. Those are ad hominem attacks.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
When someone, you're a liar, you're a deceiver, you're a, you're demonic, you're whatever, and you're a liar and a deceiver. I mean, I get that when people, and I think that's something that we can't do. And I'm glad you brought that point up.
No,
because,
we can't do that.
Yeah.
And in a conversation, when they do that, you already know that you're probably wasting your time talking to this person at this moment, because once the temperature raises and the smoke starts to fill the room, then you know that really we always say there's more smoke than light, or more heat than light being generated. And that's a point where you go over and you put your hand on their shoulder and say, friend, I really love you in the Lord, and I think maybe we ought to take this up again another time, maybe under certain different circumstances, depending on where you're. I know that in my family, I've learned a lot of this in my family because I have family members who are, I wouldn't say atheists, but they're non-believer, New Agers, abortion's the best thing since sliced bread, and the whole liberal thing. And then some who are still Baptists. And then here comes this new Catholic contingency. And so now we got these three armies
Wow.
around the dining room table. And there's many times where one of my brothers will come after me. And I've risen right up and say, let's take it out in the driveway. We're not going to finish that in here. If you want to finish this outside, let's go outside for mom's sake. And he'd say, and I didn't mind doing that at times, just because I know my brother and I know that's what he's going to respect. So he said, okay. I said, I know I'm not in a good position to go outside with you. He said, so what? And I said, good, then why don't we just discontinue this conversation for now? And I said, and I was kind of tough on him that day. I says, the reason I win all the arguments is not because I'm a good debater. It's because you have stupid positions. And he doesn't argue with me anymore. Because he says you think through your thought, you think through things, you think about them, and you know what you're. So it's calmed the whole family down. But there are times where I've just said, this is not a good place. Mom gets nervous when we do this. This isn't a good place to discuss this now.
Wow.
So there's always, sometimes our tendency, though, especially us guys, maybe more so than the ladies. Us guys, we want to win the battle. I mean, we're in this thing. We're punching. I'm not going to back off. I'm not going to be the loser in this battle. I'm going to go to the mat. But we have to remember sometimes it's better to lose an individual battle than to lose the whole war. Sometimes you can win a battle against someone today, but you lost their soul. And so I think we have to be wiser than, Jesus is wiser than serpents, I think it is. And
wise as serpents, innocent as doves,
Yes.
That's a good point. I think about a lot of the hostile conversations that I found myself in, depending on who it is and depending on how we're going, I can find myself getting real worked up. And I'm sure a lot of the listeners can the same. Because I think that our faith is such a personal thing to us, especially if we've sacrificed for it, if we've changed our lives to become Catholic, and then
and truth matters.
Yeah. And then people put us down or put our faith down. It's just hard.
Yeah. We're ready to fight for what's true.
Yeah.
I am. But I don't want to lose a soul in the process. I remember, and we should never lose our temper too. That can happen to us at times. I remember my dad telling me stories when I was a boy. He wouldn't get me a television. By the way, for fathers listening out there, if you want to do the best thing you can do for your kids is get rid of the television and read them stories instead at night. My dad didn't get us a television, and I didn't get my kids television, and my grandkids don't have television. My dad used to read me stories, and he made up stories. And he used to tell me about your temper. Don't ever lose your temper, Steve, when you get older. He said once there was a snake, and he got in an argument with a man. and the snake was much more powerful than the man. And the man knew that he had to outsmart the snake because the snake could outmuscle him. So the man got the snake mad, and he kept getting madder and madder, and the snake got so angry he tied himself all up in knots, and then the man killed him. He said, don't ever lose your temper, because if you do, you will be the loser. You'll tie yourself in knots, you'll lose your temper, and you'll lose, and your opponent will win. Now that applies in business, with your family, in politics, and it applies in religion as well. So I've always maintained my cool, and I always, because my dad taught me that, never lose your temper. Stay even and cool in a discussion.
I think that's really, really important, Steve, because I think sometimes people, and I think everybody, there's different types of people out there, but I think sometimes people will engage you. It's sort of like the bully in the schoolyard. They'll engage you just to see if they can make you lose your temper.
Oh, sure.
And that's the point. They're not trying to actually convert you. They're just kind of like, hey, watch what I can do to this Catholic guy,
And they get mad. They get mad because you don't get mad back.
Yeah, that's the thing. So like if we talk about things not to do, okay, I think you said number one was ad hominem attacks. So don't just attack the person and say something like, and I think that there are ways that Catholics do that. I think that they don't really recognize it. Like, for example, if a Catholic person would just says to a Protestant, well, that's just because you're a heretic, that there might be elements of truth in that, but it's probably not a good thing because you're still calling somebody a name. But so no ad hominem attacks, don't lose your temper, and, don't let it get personal, right? I mean, those are very, and I think even just those three things right there are enough for a lot of people to really, really improve their interactions when they get into these hostile environments, But I always tell people this: an argument takes two people. You don't, and you don't have to be drawn into something. If someone's just trying to bait you and mess with you because they think it's fun or they want to humiliate you or whatever, you don't have to take that bait. You can choose not to do that.
I agree completely. I've told people, like, for example, with Jehovah's Witnesses, when they come to the door, that the worst thing you can do with them is to act like you don't care about them, or to say, oh, you're dumb, or we don't believe in that. Because the Jehovah's Witnesses are taught that we hate them, because they're taught to hate other people who are of another religion. You can't listen to them. You can't talk to them. You really are supposed to dislike them. And they don't know how to handle love. Love is an argument that nobody knows what to do with. So when a Jehovah's Witness comes to the door, you go out of your way to let them know you love them. And in an argument or a discussion or a debate or a conversation, they should know, bottom line, that you are doing what you're doing because you love them, not because you hate them or because you want to have an argument. They come across because they're angry at you. They hate you a lot of times. But you got to let people know that you love them. I remember once when a lady came up in my face, and she was so mad at me for being Catholic in front of a bunch of people. She started yelling at me. She got right in my face like this. And after about 30 seconds, when she went, her hand went, I ducked, and I went and I gave her a big hug, and I kissed her on the cheek. I surprised her. And I said, thank you for loving me enough to care to argue with me about this. I said, I appreciate that you love me that much, and I love you too. What did that lady do? She turned as red as a beet. She blushed and was embarrassed. And I won that bout. Why? Not because I counteracted her arguments, but because I loved her. I hugged her, and I kissed her on the cheek. This lady was not a lady that gets kissed often, I'll tell you. So I think it took her by surprise, and that was the end of that discussion. And she never knew what to do with me, because that was the response I gave her. So I think I told you ahead of time, or your assistant, that I came up with a list of 6 rules for dealing with non-Catholic family and friends. And these 6 rules, and I've made them 7 now. I've added one since I wrote the article.
Is that on your website? Because I was looking for that earlier. I couldn't find it. Is it on there?
Where's that?
On your web, on your CatholicConvert.com?
I'll send you the link to it.
Okay, because we'll link it in the description to this video so people can check it out.
Yeah, it's called Six Rules for Dealing with Non-Catholic Family and Friends. It was published in Catholic Answers magazine
Great.
about 10 or 15 years ago, actually, and it's still one of the most viewed documents on their website, Catholic Answers. So you might be able to find it just going to Catholic Answers website, look in their documents, and Steve Ray, it might show up. But I'll send you the link so you
Okay.
can share
Yeah,
it.
it'll be down below.
And but the first one is don't argue with people. I'll just run through them real
Sure,
quick
that's
because
awesome.
I think
Yeah.
it's kind of summarizes what we're saying. The number one is don't argue with people. Now, I don't mean don't get into discussions, don't even have heated discussions. But when you see that it's not going anywhere, or you're making an enemy, or tempers are flaring, it's better to discontinue the conversation. End it gently. I love you. Thank you very much. Why don't we get together again when we can, in a little more calm situation, where family members aren't there, where it's like a war. So there's a time where you don't argue, especially if it's a husband and a wife, because one of the worst things that can happen is you could have become Catholic and your wife dug her heels in and says, no, I'm going to stay at Calvary Chapel. And then now, how do you deal with your wife? How do you two deal? It's going to be very easy to take snipes at one another, take pot shots at one another, make fun of one another's ideas or their churches. And so arguing is don't argue, discuss, love. Yes, argue, but you know when it's time to stop it. The second one is to love the other person more than you've ever loved them before. Now, I use the example of a husband and a wife. If the wife is angry at her husband, she'll go tell him to go sleep somewhere else. And you go sleep somewhere else for the next 10 days. You're being punished. Well, that doesn't help the husband and their relationship. It actually puts people further off. And I always say that, especially in a husband and wife, love your spouse more than you've ever loved them before. Love them with your whole being more than ever before. If it's a friend or a family member, love them more. Make sure that love is the predominant thing when they walk away from you, saying, if nothing else, he loves me. And then that's the important thing. Always display that love, because that's the one argument you cannot argue against. The third one is to pray and make sacrifices. We always say we're going to do that. It's like a cliche. Oh yeah, I'll pray about that. I'll pray. How many times do we really do it?
Wow.
But we really make a point. And I say it this way: make a list, a chart. Make it in front of God. Here's my request. And in this column is the date I made the request. And now, God, in this column is the date you give me the answer. I'm ready. You said if I ask, you'll answer. If I seek, I'll find. Well, I'm doing that now, and I'm putting you to the test here a little bit. I had a great dad, so I can relate to God that way. I have he's a wonderful father. Yeah, he's to be feared too, but he's a wonderful dad. So, okay, God, here's what I'm going to ask for this family member, this one, this one, this one. Here's the date I ask it, and I can't wait to fill in the third column when you do something about it. And be bold with God. He doesn't want us to be wimpy. Be bold with God. Ask him, tell him what you need, tell him what you want. The third, and to really make sacrifice there. Okay, I'm going to number 4. Study and do your homework. Learn apologetics. Learn the Bible verses that are going to be used against you. Learn where you can find the Eucharist in the Bible. Learn where you can find confession in the Bible. You need to know these things, because just think how sad it would be if your own kid, and this is the number one question I get, what do I do about my kids that I paid tens of thousands of dollars for them to go through Catholic school, and now they've all left the faith? How tragic would it be if your son and daughter at 35 or 40 comes to you and says, Dad, we're starting to think about this again. Why do you believe in the real presence of Christ? And you, I really don't know. How sad is that?
Wow.
So if you're going to pray for these people to come into the fullness of the faith, you better darn well know how to answer their questions when they ask them. Or say, I don't know, but we should learn. So that's number 4. Number 5 is show the joy of the Lord in your life. If you come home from Mass and say, that damn preacher, he was just that priest, he just went on, and the people weren't very friendly, and blah, 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 blah. Do you think anybody's going to want to become a Catholic and go to church with you? Never. If you're scowling all the time and you never have any joy, you're always angry because the Pope said this or Vatican II was that and all. Come on. Don't you realize that people are attracted to joy? They're attracted to pleasure, happiness. If you have the joy of the Lord, people are going to say, what was he smoking? Whatever he's been smoking, I want some of that. Well, I'll tell you what it is. I'm a Catholic, and I love the Lord, and I love going to Mass and being with God's people and hearing the Word of God and receiving Christ into my own body. Then people say, well, I want to go there. Well, you mean it's that cool? Then so show the joy and the enthusiasm about the faith. Number 6, be patient. God's not going to do it today with your family member, with your friend. You're not going to win the argument today necessarily. Give God time. Give him patience. When I look back at me, if anybody had tried to come and tell me to quit being a Protestant, be a Catholic, I would have said, get away from me. But over time, the patience of the Lord, it says, consider the patience of the Lord to be your salvation, the Bible says. So give God time. You know, there's even, Keith, we may not even see the answer to our prayer. We may be dead and gone before God actually brings the answer to the prayer in some of our family members. But then last, number 7, is the most important one. Ask God to bring somebody else into your family's life, to your member, friend, because they're never going to listen to you. But ask God to bring somebody else to influence them, and they'll listen to them. And that works.
Man, you have said so many things in there that as you're going through that list, I think, yep, that's huge. That's huge. Because for me, like, I'm in that spot, man. I mean, my kids, I came into the church 3 years ago. My kids were the preacher's kids, you know, and when we came in, my wife came with me, but my kids, they weren't into it. They came to Mass with us a few times just because they didn't know where to go or what to do. And they're older. I couldn't just basically say, kids, now we're all Catholic. But I wanted them to experience that, and they came to Mass a few times, and they were just like, we don't get this. We don't understand why this is going on. We don't like it. And now they're just like, they don't want anything to do with it. And I'm trying to do everything that you've said in the midst of that to help them. Because, I know a lot of people ask me the same question they ask you, how do I get my kids in this? And a lot of those things that you talked about, that's exactly what we need to do. And I think depending on who we are, we'll struggle with one or the other. We might be really good at going, oh, sweet, he said go find the answers. I've got all the answers. But I'm really aggressive and angry all the time, and I just send everybody articles and videos, and I'm always beating them up. Well, no, you got to have patience, and you get frustrated when it doesn't happen right now.
And a lot of times what we do when we find something exciting and new, you mentioned preachers' kids, PKs, and they are always known in my past as the worst kids in the church because dad spends all his time with the other families and ignores his own kids. So the PKs, the preachers' kids, tend to be the worst. But I know families that have become Catholic, and either a husband or a wife, they start going to daily Mass, they start praying 3 rosaries a day, they start joining men and women's groups, they start marching in front of the abortion, and they're never home because they're doing all these new things, and the kids feel neglected. The wife feels neglected. The husband feels neglected if the wife's doing it. And it's almost as that the wife or the husband has found a new lover that now is in competition with the spouse. Or the kids say, Dad doesn't really love me. He's found this new club he's a part of, and Dad loves the new club more than he does me. So I always said that when you become a Catholic, don't let the parish eat you alive, because they're going to try to get you to sign up for everything under the book. They're going to get you to want to do this and do that. And we want to do it because, man, we want to be good Catholics. We want to help the parish. But don't do it to the detriment of your family.
I remember when I first started going to my men's group, which I love, I was like, why is it that Catholics have flyers for everything? It was like I walk in, and every time I turn around, somebody's like, here's a flyer for this. We're going to go bird watching. Here's the flyer. We're going to go do this. Here's a flyer. And I remember walking in, I'm like, I need to just bring a folder with me for all the flyers I'm going to collect. And I remember one time I was going to do something at the church. I don't even remember what it was, but it was something really simple. And I was telling somebody in the leadership, and they're like, okay, well, we need the information so we can make a flyer. And I was like, no, we don't need any more flyers. There's too much. Sometimes it's so that's a great point, Steve, is the fact that in our Catholicism, that can't be the thing that takes us away from our families. We have to practice our faith, but if you spend all your time doing stuff at your parish and you're never with your wife, you're never with your kids, and you go, well, I invited them, I asked them to come. Well, of course they're not going to come. They don't understand that. They're not going to want to be involved in that. I think sometimes the mistake that we make is we think that because we're into this Catholic stuff, because we've experienced the truth, now every little thing that the church does that we're interested in, they should want to be a part of it too.
Right.
And when they're not, it can be frustrating. I remember when I took my sons to see all these relics that were coming through, you know, and we had the tour of the relics, and this priest came with, and I remember telling my boys, I'm like, hey, I want you guys to come check this out. And they were sort of like, what? So I actually convinced them, you know, I'm like, all right, they're going to come. So we came to the church to look at the relics, but instead of looking at relics, we heard an 1.5-hour presentation first. And they were just looking at me like, Dad, why did you do this to us? Why? Now they were good. They made it through, and they went down and they looked at it, and they didn't, you know, hate it. But sometimes we have to understand, look, you can't push all this stuff on your family all the time.
When I took our kids to see the relics and things, I said, no, this is going to be kind of morbid, guys, because we Catholics are a morbid bunch. We're going to go see a bunch of body parts. We collect people's body parts. Kids, what are you talking about, Dan? What are you talking about? I said, it's our Hall of Fame.
Well, it's super cool. You know,
it is super cool that we still have these. And then we look at them and say, we want to be like them. They inspire us. But I think that we also, when dealing with kids and people, we have to be a little bit radical and put things in a new light that they're not used to.
Yeah.
Make things exciting where they're not. They don't find new ways to describe things. I remember the boy that wanted me to be his confirmation saint.
He wanted you to be his confirmation saint.
He wanted me to be his sponsor.
Okay. I was like, wow.
Nobody's going to ask me to be their saint, not yet. And I remember saying, no, I wouldn't do it because I'm too busy. I had my own kids and stuff. And the lady said, well, would you just meet with them one day? And I said, sure. But I knew what I was going to do because I don't do things normal like anybody else. So I knew when that boy was coming. I had just bought a Roman helmet when I made one of my movies, and I just bought a 3-foot sword, a real double-edged sword. I could cut a head off with that. If I got the momentum, it'd go right off. It's a real sword, not a toy. So when I knew that boy was coming over to my house, I went out on the front porch, and I put that helmet on, and I put the sword in my scabbard on my belt, and my wife pinned a red blanket, a sheet over on one shoulder, and I looked just like a Roman centurion, and I waited in the shadows of my front porch. And when that kid came up the steps, I jumped out with a sword, and I pushed that kid against the wall of my brick wall. And I said, Matthew, are you ready to die for Jesus right now? If not, don't waste my time. I'm a busy man. If you're not ready to die for Jesus right now, you're not ready to be confirmed, buddy. Let me know that right now. And I put the throw, like this. And he said, I will, I can, I do. That made more of an impression on that kid. That family said everybody he talked to for a year, told them the story of the sword on Steve Ray's front porch. But that kid will never forget what it means to be confirmed. And I think we really need to present things and argue or share things with people different than they're expecting to hear. Something more interesting, you know?
That's a great point, and I think would make an incredible article if you haven't already written one, but like more examples of it. Because I'm thinking of, so like one of the other questions I have is, how can we help people prepare for these hostile conversations? And I think you've already said so many things that everyone's probably grabbing something right now. So I feel like we've got a lot to take from that. So yeah, I mean, it's important to think about how we can put things in different ways. I remember for myself, like a new way for me to think about like the Virgin Mary was to think about her as the new Eve and the new Ark of the Covenant. And when I began to like think about that and learn about that and know that that was like part of the church teaching, it's like, oh, now I understand where the Immaculate Conception comes from, where the Assumption comes from, you know, because we're stuck. And a lot of our Protestant brothers and sisters are still stuck in this world where they're just like, well, show me the chapter and verse where it says that. Right. And we have to think deeper than that and come up with new ways.
I like to even do it in that and also other ways. What was Mary and Joseph, what were they really like? Mary was only a 15-year-old girl. Well, now all of a sudden all the young teenage girls, their ears pick up because, what do you mean she was only 15? And I said, and she didn't look like what she looks like in the pictures. You see her with her hair just done out of the beauty parlor. Her fingernails are all just done. I said, this girl was 15 years old. She carried the water from the well every day. She had flies buzzing around her head. She was walking up to her ankles in manure and mud, all the way back and forth to the well. Joseph was not a sissy carrying flowers around. Joseph could pick you, Keith, up anytime he wanted and throw you over a wall if he wanted to. Joseph was a manly man. He was a tough man. And I think we present these saints as as flower children, as sissies. And they weren't. Joseph and Jesus and Mary were some of the toughest people you'd ever want to meet. They lived a rugged life. They worked as carpenters, humping rocks around. That's what Jesus and Joseph, they work with rocks. These guys were manly men, but we know we make a big mistake at presenting them very feminine and effeminate. But
Yeah,
I believe we have to present things. We don't change the gospel, but we have to find interesting, creative ways to inspire people to want to think about it.
That's awesome. And I think that's a great topic for a book or an article or something or a video maybe. I mean, I'm sure you've got a lot of things going on. We'll talk about that in a minute, but add that to your list, Steve. Like 55 cool ways to say things in a different way to engage your Protestant brother and sisters. I don't know, maybe it can be cool. Sometimes when I'm doing these conversations with people, it's like we start brainstorming different ideas. But I love that. I think that's really cool. So, man, we've said so much, or you've said so much about how to engage with people who are hostile. I just want to follow up by just saying, look, here's the deal, everybody. This isn't something that you're going to be able to avoid. And understand this is part of what Christ meant when he said that I've come not to bring peace, but a sword, division. You can't walk around with the fullness of the gospel and the fullness of the truth in a world that's so hostile toward it. And of course, we could talk also about why is it that the Catholic faith gets attacked so strongly by everybody? It's like what unites everyone against, what unites people that hate each other is they hate us worse, sometimes. And I know it can really feel like that. But I want to just encourage you all to remember what Steve said. Remember the idea of loving people and just learning some things in your faith and having that patience and perseverance to pray to get through it. It's not always going to be easy, and you're going to have plenty of times when you walk away from a conversation and you go, man, I blew it. I blew it. I mean, that happened to me last week, and I'm just like, oh, I have to go back now to this person and try to fix this. And it's okay. But at the same time, you don't have to be somebody's punching bag either. You don't have to, because you love Jesus and you're a Catholic, you don't have to sit back and just take garbage all the time. You can choose to engage in ways that can be helpful and useful, or you can choose to just walk away and not be involved in that. It's okay. It's okay. But Steve, you've been so awesome today. Tell us a little bit what else you've been working on lately. I know you're the pilgrimage guy, but tell us about what that's looked like in the middle of a pandemic for you.
Well, because of all the virus stuff going on, we are grounded for a year. We were one of the last groups out of Israel before the world shut down. But we have 8 trips planned for next year, 5 of them going to Israel, 1 St. Paul cruise, 1 trip to Ireland, and we're following the Marian shrines through Portugal, Spain, and France, Lourdes and Fatima.
Wow.
So we're going to get back in the air next year. I'm working on my book on Genesis. It's going to be a commentary on Genesis, which is very unique. I don't think there's anything like it in the Catholic world. So that'll probably be out in a year. It's going to take a year to get the final editing and everything done. But one of the things I'm excited about right now, Keith, is that on January 8th through the 10th, coming up, January 8th through 10, I started something called it's a virtual Catholic Bible conference. And the title of it is Take and Read, A Journey into the Bible. And it's going to be free for those 3 days. And I've got the best speakers in the country. I've got over 50 speakers that are going to be part of this conference. It's all going to be virtual. So you can get on the computer and you can walk in and hear Scott Hahn give his talk, Jeff Cavins, Father Chris Alar, Father Mitch Pacwa. Kimberly Hahn's going to do a talk on how to introduce your children to the Bible.
Wow.
I've got 50 plus talks that are going to be going on during that weekend, and it's all free. I'm going to have
That's
how
incredible.
to use Bible software to study the Bible. What Catholic Bible study programs are out there for people to use? How do I get started reading the Bible? I'm scared of the Bible. It's a big book. So we got everything Bible for the Catholic coming up, and it's going to be great. So I'll give you the link for that if you can put it on your podcast.
Absolutely. I'll put it in the description, and you better believe I'll be watching that. That's incredible. And
good. And people can sign up now, register now, and then you'll be all set to go for free during that weekend.
Wonderful.
So those are just some of the things we're doing.
And your website is just Catholic-convert.com.
Just Catholic Convert.
Catholic-convert.com. Yeah. Catholic-convert.com.
Everything's there. It's like the hub of a wheel. when you go there, you'll see pilgrimages, you'll see resources. My store is there. I got all my books and movies. You see conversion stories. I got hundreds of conversion stories.
Yeah.
We've got, if you want to take a pilgrimage to Ireland and you don't have money to go to my pilgrimage site. All the pilgrimages we've done in the last year, there's 2-hour movies of those pilgrimages. You can watch them and join them virtually.
Wow. And of course, you have this book, Upon This Rock.
Yep.
Which is
and in this one,
incredible.
I would really encourage people too. This is my conversion story.
Yep, I have that in the other room. Yeah,
crossing the Tiber. This is the one where I go through all the reasons why and the fathers of the church and how we argued with Protestants and so on. So,
well,
a lot of fun.
Man.
It's been good being with you, Keith. Keep up the good work.
Thank you, Steve.
God bless you.
Thank you so much for your ministry and just for the role you played. And you didn't even really know, but the role that you played in my journey, it was the Lord's work, and that's the thing that we got to remember is like you said earlier, if we live our faith passionately and we do the work that God's called us to do, we're not always going to see everything. It's not always going to happen right in front of us, but that doesn't mean that it's not being used. And the way that God used you in my story was a ripple that has meant everything to me. So I thank you for your yes. I thank you for your ministry, for getting in a car and driving to Milan, Illinois, and giving a talk. Because there's a lot of other places you could be, obviously, with going overseas so much and different things, but you've still taken time to fly around the country and give talks in parishes and do all this stuff. And I just want you to know, from my perspective, that's huge. And I really, really appreciate you and your ministry. And I encourage all my listeners to follow you and support you. And if you've always wanted to go on a pilgrimage, this is the guy to take with you or to go on his trip. So,
and one word of encouragement with family and friends. We've all made mistakes in the past. We've all burned bridges. But remember, today is the first day from now on. Love the family, love your family, and show the enthusiasm of the Lord, because kids love what their parents love. They will always come back in time. Just be a good example. Don't push, love. Be a good example. Be excited about it, and kids will love what their families love. And in time, God will bring them all back. But to remember, tomorrow is the first day of the rest of your relationship together. So it's a whole brand new start.
Amen. Well, I want to thank all of you for watching this episode of Catholic Feedback. And if you have a question that you'd like me to tackle, send it to me at feedback@catholicfeedback.com. I'm so appreciative of those of you that take time to write those questions out so that we can connect the eternal truths of the Catholic faith to everyday life. And that's certainly what we've done here today. And I'm so grateful and thankful for all of those of you who've watched and shared this episode. God bless every single one of you. And I want to thank you, my dear brothers and sisters, for being a part of what God's doing here at Catholic Feedback. So once again, thank you to Steve. And we'll look forward to seeing you guys here next week for another episode of Catholic Feedback. Take care and God bless.